The judge's gavel came down, and with one strike, my husband lost the right to speak my name. We were standing outside the same ballroom where months earlier he'd turned me into a public joke. Now, by law, he couldn't say a word. It hadn't been easy getting here. It had taken weeks of quiet, calculated work, collecting every smirk, every careless joke, every witness. It had taken turning my own silence into a weapon. That night at the gala, when the laughter died and I smiled like nothing broke, I already knew I was going to end this. Not in an argument, not in a fight, in court. I'd been in heels for 6 hours when the microphone crackled. The gala was nearly over, champagne flutes half empty, waiters sweeping up linen napkins, and the ballroom still humming with the kind of polite laughter that comes after an evening of big checks and bigger egos. This was my event, my donors, my reputation wrapped in fairy lights and fresh orchids. And then, without warning, my husband stood. He didn't belong to this world, not really. His law practice kept him in a different orbit, one where sarcasm was a currency, and every conversation had a punchline. But he'd insisted on coming tonight, to see me in action. I thought it was support. He reached for the microphone. Just a quick word from the lucky man, married to the best fundraiser in the state, he began. The crowd smiled. I smiled. I had no idea I was about to become the punchline. He launched into what he called a surprise toast, though it was more of a roast. A few gentle digs about my long hours, my obsession with donor thank you notes. I could live with that. Then he leaned in toward the mic, lowered his voice like he was about to share a charming secret, and delivered the line that made my blood run cold. Of course, if you've ever given to the foundation, you know my wife has a special way of convincing people to open their wallets. The room erupted, not in laughter, but in that awkward mix of chuckles and gasps that comes when no one's sure if they've just heard something wildly inappropriate. The kind of sound that sticks to your skin. He grinned. I'm kidding, obviously, but his eyes darted toward my CEO, toward 2 of my biggest donors. And then he said, though between us, I think I should be jealous of a couple of you fellas. There was a pause, just a heartbeat, but in that beat, I saw my career tilt. For the record, my name is Claire Dalton. I'm 36 years old, a fundraising director for one of the largest hospital foundations in the state. I'm the person you call when you need to raise $500,000 before the fiscal year ends. I am good at my job because I am disciplined, strategic, and, until this moment, unshakably professional in every room I enter. Flashbulbs from a photographer lit the moment like a crime scene. I kept my smile frozen, my glass steady in my hand, though the stem cut into my palm. Someone clapped half-heartedly. The MC awkwardly thanked him. Conversations resumed, but I could feel the shift, the sidelong glances, the faint whispers. My cheeks burned, but my expression didn't move. I excused myself, gliding toward the restrooms as if I needed to fix my lipstick. Inside the marble stall, I locked the door, sat on the closed toilet lid, and let my breath come fast and shallow. I could hear the muffled bass of the band through the wall. My hands shook so hard, I had to put the glass down on the tile floor. I thought of the faces out there, the board members, the couple whose $250,000 pledge I'd just secured, my CEO who had taken a chance on me 5 years ago when I was a nobody. And now this. In the dim bathroom light, I rolled my wedding ring between my fingers. Gold, plain, bought in a hurry, because neither of us cared about showy. I stared at it and realized I couldn't remember the last time I looked at it with anything close to affection. When I finally stood, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My lipstick was still perfect, my eyes, not so much. But I lifted my chin, smoothed my dress, and walked back into the ballroom as if nothing had happened. On the surface, I was composed. Inside, I was writing the opening chapter of a very different story, one that wouldn't end with a laugh. Long before the gala, there were smaller moments that looked harmless enough to everyone else, but to me, carried a sharp edge. It started early in our marriage. We'd be at a barbecue with friends, and he'd make a funny comment about how I always overpack for trips. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, because that's what you do when you're newly married, and you don't want to make it awkward. But over time, the jokes shifted. He'd mimic my voice when I was talking about work, exaggerating my tone, rolling his eyes when I mentioned deadlines. Or he'd tell new acquaintances, "Claire's great at getting people to say yes. She could sell ice to an Eskimo, especially if he's male." He always had the same defense. "I'm just being funny, babe. Don't be so sensitive." I told myself it was his way of showing affection. That's what I wanted to believe, because the alternative, that my husband enjoyed undermining me, was too painful to face. The truth is, I was used to smoothing things over. Growing up, my father had a knack for delivering cutting remarks in the middle of family dinners, usually at my mother's expense. She would swallow them with a thin smile, then clean up the dishes while the rest of us pretended nothing happened. I learned early that it was easier to play along than to confront. But the pattern with my husband had its own flavor. It wasn't just in private, it was in front of people whose opinions mattered to me. At work gatherings, at dinners with my family, even at my own birthday party. One year when I turned 34, he gave a toast that began, "Claire's amazing. She works so hard, she barely has time to see me. But if you're a client or a donor, well, she'll drop everything for you." The room laughed. I smiled tightly. Later, when I told him it bothered me, he kissed my forehead and said, "You're too uptight. Loosen up." I wish I could say I confronted him seriously back then, but I didn't. I compartmentalized. I buried my irritation under the belief that he didn't mean harm. The only time his words ever caused a real problem was 2 years ago, when a colleague asked me, with a smirk, if the rumors were true about how I closed deals. I told her I didn't know what she meant. She told me she'd heard it from someone who knows my husband. That should have been my red flag, but instead of drawing a hard line, I rationalized. Maybe he hadn't realized how his humor spread. Maybe I could explain, and he'd stop. I see now that all I did was give him more room to sharpen the knife. The gala wasn't an accident. It was the culmination of years of small cuts, delivered in public, under the warm cover of a smile. And this time, I wouldn't be smiling back. The Monday after the gala, I walked into the office with the same calm face I'd worn all weekend. But calm doesn't stop whispers. 2 people went quiet when I entered the break room. In the elevator, someone made small talk about eventful nights, their smile a little too tight. I told myself it was in my head, until I saw the meeting request from HR. It was scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp. The subject line read, "Follow-up from gala." When I stepped into the HR conference room, my boss was already there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The HR manager gave me the polite, professional smile people use before delivering something unpleasant. "Claire," she began, We've received a couple of calls from donors this morning. My stomach sank. They wanted clarification on something your husband said Friday night. One of them asked if you were too friendly in your donor relations. The way she said it, carefully, clinically, still felt like a slap. I see, I said, because there was nothing else to say without making it worse. My boss leaned forward. I know you, Claire. I know this isn't who you are. But perception matters. We need a written statement addressing the incident, just to keep it on record. The HR manager added, and it might be best to take a step back from donor-facing events for a little while, just until this blows over. The word step back rang in my ears. This wasn't just embarrassment anymore. This was career damage. I'd worked for years to earn the trust of our biggest donors. One joke from my husband, and suddenly my integrity was up for debate. I nodded, playing the part of the cooperative employee. Understood. But inside, something shifted. I'd been humiliated before. A bad joke at a party, a teasing remark at my expense. But this was different. This wasn't about my feelings. This was about my professional name being pulled into a narrative I didn't write. On my lunch break, I sat in my car and stared at my phone. Part of me wanted to call him, to tell him exactly what he'd cost me. But I knew how that conversation would go. He'd say I was overreacting. He'd tell me to let it go. Instead, I opened my notes app and wrote 3 words: document everything. Now, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew this. I wasn't going to let him have the last word, not at my expense and not in public. I've learned that rage is loud, but strategy is silent. And if there's one thing my husband never paid attention to, it was silence. That night, I didn't confront him. I didn't slam doors or raise my voice. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table while he watched television in the other room, and began building a mental file. Step 1 was simple: collect proof. The gala had been professionally recorded. The AV team always captured speeches for the Foundation's archives. I emailed the event coordinator, asking for a copy for donor review. No one questioned it. 2 hours later, a USB drive with the full audio and video landed on my desk. Step 2. Capture his own words. He'd bragged about his killer toast to friends before. I suspected he would again. That night, while he was showering, I opened his laptop. He never bothered to log out of anything, and scrolled through his group chats. There it was, a thread with his college buddies. Killed it at Claire's gala tonight. Room was dead serious till I cracked that donor joke. You should have seen her face. I took screenshots, every word. Step 3. Build the timeline. I pulled out a clean, leather-bound notebook I'd been saving for something important. Each page got a date, a location, and exactly what was said, starting with the first time he made a public jab about my professionalism. I went back years. The last page had an empty header, "To be continued." By the end of the week, I had a growing archive, audio screenshots, and my own detailed notes. It wasn't just about the gala anymore. It was a pattern, one that could be proven. I didn't know if it would end in divorce, in court, or in something else entirely. But I knew I wanted the option. So instead of arguing, I let him think I'd moved on. I smiled at breakfast. I asked about his day. I made his favorite chicken piccata. Because when you want to win quietly, the last thing you do is let your opponent know they're already losing. A good case isn't built overnight. It's layered, methodical, and boring. in all the ways that make it powerful. By the second week after the gala, I'd stopped thinking like a wife and started thinking like an investigator. Every conversation, every text, every interaction became part of a record I was curating. Witnesses came first. I called Emily, our youngest development intern. Sweet, painfully honest, and most importantly, present at the gala microphone moment. I framed it carefully. "Do you remember what my husband said in his toast?" She hesitated. "I do. It didn't sound right. Some people at my table looked uncomfortable." I thanked her and wrote it down verbatim. Next was Dan, the AV tech who'd captured the whole night. He didn't just have the video, he had the unedited audio feed. "You need this for internal review, right?" he asked. "Exactly," I said. And when I played it later, there it was. Every pause, every awkward laugh, every single word in perfect clarity. 2 board members also agreed to refresh my memory on what they had heard. Both confirmed the phrasing, both noted the reaction in the room. I logged them as potential affidavits. Evidence was next. I printed every screenshot from his group chat bragging about the killer toast, including the message about my face. I highlighted the part where one friend replied, "That's cold, man." From his phone, I found another gem, a text to my boss 2 days after the gala. "Sorry if I stirred the pot, just trying to keep things lively. You know how Claire gets with her donors." That one went in bold red ink in my notebook. Legal strategy came last, and most importantly, I booked a consultation with a divorce attorney, a woman named Victoria Holt, who had the kind of calm, surgical demeanor I craved. She didn't flinch when I laid out the timeline. "This isn't just marital misconduct," she said, flipping through my notes. "You've got potential defamation, reputational harm, maybe even grounds for injunctive relief. And if we fold this into a divorce filing, we can get protective orders that cover both personal and professional boundaries." "Injunctive relief?" I asked. "Essentially, a court order that bars him from making further statements about you to anyone. We can also demand a retraction and, depending on damages, financial compensation." The way she said financial compensation was clinical, but to me it felt like the first sip of water after a drought. We discussed timing. Filing too soon might look reactionary. Waiting could let him slip up again. Victoria suggested a controlled gap, a few weeks to let him think the storm had passed. In that window, I'd keep documenting, and so I did. At dinner with friends, he told a slightly sanitized version of the gala story, still painting me as charming in ways that get results. I didn't react, but the next morning I wrote it down. Every smug retelling became another thread in the rope he was braiding around his own neck. By the end of the month, my notebook was thick, my USB drive labeled and sealed, my witnesses quietly on standby. The beauty of it was he didn't have a clue. He thought the absence of an argument meant forgiveness. It didn't. It meant I was done talking and ready to let the court speak for me. There's a difference between planning an exit and preparing for war. By mid-March, I was doing both. The first step was financial. I opened a new bank account in my name only, at a branch across town where no one knew me. I moved a portion of my paycheck there each month, small enough not to trigger questions, but steady enough to build a reserve. I updated my direct deposit with accounting adjustments as the excuse. Next came the paper trail. I requested copies of our joint tax returns, property deeds, and his law firm's partnership agreements, all for insurance purposes. In reality, I was ensuring that when the day came, I could walk into court with more than just words. Then I drew my first visible boundary. I sent him a short, formal email. Subject: request for privacy and respect. Please refrain from making any personal or professional comments about me to donors, colleagues, or mutual acquaintances. Claire. It was deliberate, cold, professional. Something an HR department would send to a problematic employee. His reply came 10 minutes later. Relax. It was a joke. Everyone knew. That single line told me everything I needed to know. He still believed this was about my inability to take a joke. He had no idea the ground beneath him was already shifting. I started setting small traps. One evening, I mentioned that the gala's AV recordings were being reviewed for promotional clips. I watched his face, looking for a flicker of worry. Nothing. His arrogance was intact, and that worked in my favor. The last step was emotional. I stopped giving him the reactions he craved. No flinches, no sighs, no visible hurt. If he made a remark in front of friends, I'd smile faintly and change the subject. It drove him slightly mad that he couldn't get a rise out of me. By the end of the month, the quiet between us had changed. It wasn't the uneasy silence of a bad marriage. It was the stillness before a storm. And I was the one deciding when it would break. When it happened, he didn't see it coming. That was the point. It was a Tuesday afternoon, overcast and forgettable. I was sitting in a quiet cafe, 2 blocks from my attorney's office, reviewing deposition outlines with Victoria over cappuccinos. We'd filed the divorce petition that morning, along with a request for temporary injunctive relief to stop him from making any further statements about me. The process server's timing was flawless. At exactly 3:17 p.m., while my husband was leaving his gym, a man in a dark windbreaker stepped in front of him in the parking lot. "Are you Daniel Dalton?" "Yes." "Hand over envelope. You've been served." I didn't witness it firsthand. That would have been too messy, too personal. Instead, I got the moment secondhand through a friend who happened to be at the same gym. She said he stood there in the drizzle, looking down at the packet like it was written in a foreign language. Within minutes, my phone lit up. "Daniel, what the hell is this?" "Daniel, divorce, injunction. Are you insane?" "Daniel, call me now." I didn't. I slid the phone into my bag, took another sip of cappuccino, and nodded as Victoria moved on to the next point of our strategy. That night, the texts escalated. Accusations, insults, threats to tell everyone what I'm really like. I saved them all, time-stamped and untouched. He wanted a fight. I wanted a verdict, and in a few weeks, we'd both get exactly what we were after, just not in the same way. Courtrooms have their own gravity. The air feels heavier, the light sharper, the silence deeper. I sat at the petitioner's table in a navy suit, my hair pulled back, every line of my face arranged into polite neutrality. Daniel sat across the aisle, arms folded, his jaw tight. He'd dressed like he was going to brunch. Open collar, no tie, as if this was beneath him. The judge, a lean woman with silver hair, scanned our file. "We're here for a hearing on petitioner's request for temporary injunctive relief," she said. "Ms. Holt, you may proceed." Victoria rose, like she'd been waiting her entire career for this exact moment. "Your Honor, this case involves a deliberate, repeated pattern of public disparagement by the respondent, culminating in a false and damaging statement made at a professional event attended by the petitioner's colleagues, superiors, and major donors. We will show that this statement and the respondent's subsequent communications caused immediate harm to the petitioner's professional reputation. She hit the key word, reputation, like a gavel. The judge glanced at me. Ms. Dalton, you may testify. I walked to the witness stand, swore in, and sat. Victoria's voice softened. Claire, can you describe the event on February 14th? I told the story plainly. The gala, the surprise toast, the line about having a special way of convincing donors. I described the silence, the looks, the HR meeting that followed. My voice didn't waver. Then Victoria played the audio. The courtroom speakers filled with the faint clink of glasses, Daniel's voice, the exact pause before his final line. You could hear the laughter, jagged, uneasy, and then the MC trying to recover. When the recording ended, the room was quiet. Victoria continued. And following this event, did the respondent acknowledge the harm? I slid the printed text into the evidence folder. Relax. It was a joke, everyone knew. The judge read it, her lips tightening almost imperceptibly. Opposing counsel stood. Your Honor, this was humor between spouses, taken out of context. My client never intended harm. This is hypersensitivity, not defamation. Victoria didn't flinch. Intent is irrelevant to reputational damage. What matters is impact, and we have documented proof of both the statement and the fallout. Multiple witnesses confirm the room's reaction, and the petitioner's employer temporarily removed her from donor-facing duties. She handed the judge the HR memo, the donor's inquiry email, and the screenshots of Daniel bragging about the toast to his friends. The judge took her time reading, then she looked at Daniel. Mr. Dalton, I hope you understand that words carry weight, especially when they are aimed at someone's integrity in a professional setting. Your attempt to pass this off as humor is not persuasive. Her tone was cool, almost bored, but I felt the verdict before she even said it. The court grants the temporary injunction. Effective immediately, you are prohibited from making any statements, written or verbal, about the petitioner's professional conduct or personal life to any third party. You will also issue a written retraction to the petitioner's employer and relevant donors within 7 days. Daniel's head snapped toward his attorney. You can't be serious. The judge's gavel cut him off. We're done here. I stepped down from the stand, my pulse steady. Outside the courtroom, Victoria smiled faintly. That's just the beginning. Discovery will be interesting. I thought of the notebook at home, the USB drive, the stack of emails. Yes, discovery would be interesting. As we walked toward the elevator, I glanced at the clock. 11:42 a.m. In less than 2 hours, my life had shifted again, but this time the ground under my feet was solid. Daniel had tried to turn my career into a joke. Now, by court order, the only thing he could talk about was the weather. There wasn't fireworks after the hearing, there was paperwork. By the next morning, my inbox held a neatly worded retraction addressed to my CEO and the board. I regret my comments. They were false and inappropriate. I apologize for any harm caused to Ms. Claire Dalton's reputation and the foundation. It was sterile, but it was binding. That mattered more than remorse. Within a week, the tone at work shifted. The HR memo was updated to reflect the injunction and the retraction, and my boss stopped speaking in careful half-sentences. I was reinstated to every donor-facing event with a note in my personnel file that read like an antidote to gossip: unblemished record, exemplary performance. Daniel's circle reacted the way people do when the lights come up in a theater, blinking, unsure where to look. The friend who'd called his toast cold stopped replying to him in the group chat. 2 others apologized to me privately for laughing that night. I accepted without warmth. Settlement talks began under Victoria's steady hand. We kept it clean, a mutual non-disparagement clause with teeth, a video retraction to be sent to the gala's donor list, a financial settlement folded into the divorce for reputational harm and legal costs, and a clause I requested personally: no contact with my workplace in any form ever. He wanted to argue over dollars. I wanted closure in writing. We both got what we came for. When the documents were signed, I didn't celebrate. I went home, opened my leather notebook to the first page, and read the earliest entry. The handwriting was small and careful. I'd written "don't forget" in the margin. I hadn't, and I wouldn't. But I was finished carrying it. 6 months later, I stood under the same crystal chandeliers, in the same ballroom, wearing a deep emerald gown that caught the light every time I moved. The gala tables glittered with glassware and gold chargers. My donors, my room, were here again. But there was one notable absence. I was the final speaker of the night. The MC introduced me simply: our Director of Development, Claire Dalton. I walked to the podium with an ease I hadn't felt in a year. This time there was no need to brace myself for what someone else might say. Every word would be mine. I thanked the donors, the volunteers, the board. I spoke about the hospital's newest programs, the milestones we'd reached, the lives changed because generosity had met need. And then, just before I closed, I added something that wasn't in my notes. I've learned something over the past year, I said, my voice steady. A voice with a microphone can build a room or break a person. Choose carefully. There was a pause, not awkward this time, but weighted, intentional. Then the applause began. It grew warm and sustained until it filled the ballroom. From the stage, I let my eyes travel over the tables. I saw the board members who'd defended me, the donors who'd quietly stood by me. Even Emily, the intern, now hired full-time, smiling like she knew exactly what that last line meant. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, the same as the night he'd tried to turn me into a joke. But the air was different, lighter, mine. As I stepped away from the podium, I felt something I hadn't in months. Not vindication, not even relief. It was something quieter, stronger. It was dignity, untouched, and that was the real revenge. If you believe dignity is worth defending, share this story. And if you've ever turned your silence into strength, tell me in the comments how you did it. Because quiet revenge is always louder than the people who tried to break you.